Okay, good evening, everyone. Melinda speaking here. On behalf of FOSI committee, it is my pleasure to welcome in the 30th FOSI online talk series. I hope you enjoy your dinner already and ready to see the presentation. And amid this COVID-19 situation, outbreak situation, hope everybody doing well, stay at home and keep physical distance. I would like to extend my gratitude to our sponsor of Noble Energy Resources for funding of this Zoom platform. With us together already joined the FOSI committee, Mas Ricky, our General Secretary, Pak Win, Tri Handayani, and the rest will be joining us soon. We're glad to inform you that we established the FOSI YouTube channel. We uploaded all the videos from this talk already, and don't forget to subscribe and like the channel, and please enjoy the video. And today's talk will be uploaded as well. And the committee is always trying to keep the consistency in organizing this online talk series that we can learn together through this platform. Therefore, we are more than happy for feedback and suggestion. I would like to thank you for joining us and get ready to be excited for a while. And tonight, the topic will be the truth about fault shale analysis. Moving right along, it is now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Quinn, Structural Geologist from Batley Geoscience Limited. Thank you very much for sparing your time this evening in Jakarta time and last time in UK. I believe most of you know him, maybe even met him already. Later, I will let him to introduce a bit about himself prior to start the presentation. And hopefully the materials can be shared for us, Dave, for our documentation. If anyone need the material, please wait until the end of the session. We will send a bit later. Well, before I hand over to our guest speaker, as usual, please allow me to give you some rules in order to make this meeting running smoothly. I would like to get your attention for a moment. First, I recommend all participants to mute the audio and switch off your video during explanation from Dave to maintain good connection. The presentation may be recorded for screening within the FOSI platforms. A Q&A box can be found in the icon panels, usually at the bottom of your screen. Enter your name for the committee later on to collect after the presentation. It will be answered live by Dave Quinn. Later on, you might turn on your audio or video to deliver your questions. I hope everybody is fine. If anyone would like to ask him in the middle of his presentation, I think Dave, it's okay. Just put your name in the chat box and committee will notify Dave later on to answer the question. Let's see how many questions arises. Well, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the talk and please welcome Dave Quinn. Dave, now your turn.
Thank you very much, Melinda. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks also for the opportunity to speak to so many people. And from as far as that goes, thanks to everyone who is taking time out of their evening. It's very much appreciated, and I believe we've people from all over the world. So indeed, if you're having your morning coffee, thanks also for taking the time out. It's very much appreciated. I suppose Melinda asked me to introduce myself. I'm a PhD structural geologist. Got my PhD in Ireland. I'm Irish, but I work for a UK company called Badley's. Been there now about 15 years, and in all that time, basically, my whole job is to do structural analyses and fault shale analyses. So I've done lots, hundreds, all over the world. All different basins, all different settings, and there is a commonality to all of it. Fault shale analysis is not a dark art or a mystery. There's a lot of good science behind it, but I think that isn't always applied as well as it could be, and I think that's probably what lets down of fault shale analyses that we see. So, like I say, UK company called Batley Geoscience Limited, and we have our own software. It's called T7. It used to be called Trap Tester, but this is not going to be a software talk. Okay, I'm not going to discuss the software again. All I'll say is that, you know, we have been building this software for going on 30 years now to do fault seal analysis. It does a lot of other things, but that's what it does. And we have local representation in Jakarta in the form of Petropro. And hopefully some of you guys will know these lovely people, and they're local to you. If you need to reach out to somebody after the presentation because you want to know more, please, you know, Rennie, Gouge, Ron, Davis, they're all in Jakarta, working for Petropro and representing us there. So you're more than welcome to contact those. But like I say, this is not at all a software talk. This is a theory presentation, and I'll kind of give you, if you like, a contents section, but you'll see it hopefully kind of flows through. I want to speak about the scale at which we observe things, the differences between types of fault seals, the shale gouge ratio algorithm. So shale gouge ratio is something you'll often thrown around when you discuss fault seal, but it's very important because that was really the first proper quantitative fault seal analysis. That's when it all started back in '97. Up until then, we had other ways of doing it, but they were more qualitative. They weren't as quantitative. So that was no moment. And then I'll speak about faults, how we model them, what we probably should do for best practice. And if I have time at the end, I'll speak a little bit about fault seal in a production sense. But for the most part in this talk, I'll be talking about it in the next, but you'll get a bit of something from everything. So the first truth about fault seal is that there are two words, fault and seal. But when things go wrong, as in when you see bad fault seal analyses, sometimes it's because people are obsessing over the seal bit, but they don't properly quantify it. More often than not, it's because they don't spend enough time on the first bit, on the fault. The fault itself, the fault model is incredibly important. The structural coherency of your trap is probably more important than anything you do in terms of the seal. So that's the first truth, is that people kind of get this back to front. It's fault first and then seal. So what do I mean by a fault seal? There are two main overarching types of fault seal. This is a shale and this is a fault, and the shale in the footwall, let's say, has been down thrown. This is the same shale here into the hanging wall. So this has moved down here and it has passed the sand in between, and it has smeared and gouged and brecciated the material that is in this shale into the fault zone between where it used to be and now. So let's say I look at this sand and I fill that sand with oil. That can't go anywhere. There's shale on the other side, so there's nowhere for it to go. It doesn't matter what's happening in the fault. This is called a juxtaposition seal. There's no escape route on the other side, so the fault really kind of doesn't matter. What matters is the juxtaposition of an impermeable barrier on the other side of our reservoir. Well, what about if I fill that sand with oil? So if I fill this sand with oil, then it can escape here. This is sand as well. This is porous, this is permeable. It could get away here, but it has to get past what we call a membrane seal. And is formed by all of the things that have been entrained into that fault. So there are two overarching main types of seal. I don't really need to talk much about juxtaposition seal, other than to say that you can only identify these by doing good structural geology. What I'll talk about now is membrane seal. And before I do that, I'll just give an extra kind of caveat here, is that once you've charged your trap, if the fault moves again, then the chances are that, yes, oil could escape across the trap, but it could also escape up the fault, because a moving fault can be a conduit for flow. Now, thinking about stress, dilation, the escape of fluid, all of that is another presentation. I don't have time to cover all of the topics tonight, so I'm literally just going to concentrate on a cross-fault seal, but up-dip leakage and up-dip migration is extremely important, not just as an escape route, but also as a charge mechanism. Sometimes you want a fault to charge your trap, so you need that up-dip migration. So it's something to bear in mind, but what I'll speak about today are, basically membrane seals in terms of exploration. And in exploration, we think about seals on a geological timescale because the charge might have happened 50 million years ago. It needs to still be there. It needs to be trapped for a long time. So that needs to be a proper barrier. But even if the seal isn't a perfect seal, it can have an effect when we try to produce from the reservoir. And that on a production timescale, we term these baffles. So faults that may not seal for a long time, but if they seal for more than 50 years, well, that's more than the lifetime of your field, and it's more than, like that's effectively a seal. So these don't need to be perfect seals in order to be important. For instance, if I defined my GRV for my volume as all of the sand here, and I just thought that this fault wasn't a seal, if I drill a well and I start producing from here, maybe the oil from here can't get across this membrane. Well, if it slows it down enough to effectively compartmentalize that part of the reservoir, then it's a seal and we have to consider it. So how do faults seal? So I'm going to build up a sandstone, shale, sandstone sequence, and then I'm going to fault it. So what happens? It's a three-dimensional effect, right? The fault is a three-dimensional object. It has a nice geometry, but we kind of tend to only look at it in either map view or cross-section view. So we generally pick faults in a section. But this is the thing. We don't even see the fault. Like, where's the fault here? Your eye can pick it out, and some AI algorithm maybe can pick it out, but you don't actually see the fault. What you see is the dislocation of the events. Like, where's the fault here? It's hard to kind of see. You don't see a thin line that represents the fault, is what I'm saying. So it's an abstract kind of an idea, even within the seismic. And this is what I'm talking about when I say scales of observation. You go to an outcrop and fault about this side, maybe got 2 meters through tail. The core damage zone near the fault, they can be important when you're producing, because sometimes that's actually where you're producing the oil from. If the oil is mainly held in fractures, like in carbonates, it might flow better from damage zones than from the reservoir itself if the porosity has been increased by that damage. But again, we're looking at things on a kind of a 2 meter scale here. When we look at things in seismic, I saw this nice picture on the internet. I put the reference from it below. It was in a LinkedIn article. This is a wave building in South Korea. It's a kind of cool piece of architecture, but it also is cool because it gives you an idea of the wavelength that you will expect from your seismic in, well, this is probably poor seismic, but look, here's a bus, and that's a tall building, it's 120 meters. So if that's the resolution of your seismic, and that's a cycle, well, then that fault there is probably that size, right? And I don't mean just that size, I mean that's the throw, that's how much it's thrown, it's dislocated. You can't walk to an outcrop anywhere in the world and see a fault that big, not in its entirety. You can see parts of it, but you can never see the whole thing. And okay, that's bad seismic. Maybe your seismic's a little bit better than that, and the fault is bigger. This green fault might be about the size of that if this was decent seismic. But that is a kind of a trap bounding fault size, you know. In order to hold hydrocarbons over a long time, you're looking at big faults and big structures, and they're not really what we see in the field. This is a really big outcrop. This is a big quarry from northern Italy. And if I take one of your, the little buses that nip around Jakarta all the time, I could fit at least 3 into just the throw of this fault, right? So that's in height terms, it's at least 3, if not 4 times the height of that bus. And a 15-meter displacement fault is probably about as small a fault as you can see in most seismic. It's very difficult to see anything smaller than that. Now, we've got great seismic coming out, broadband, all the rest of it, high resolution. That can get to smaller throws, but for the most part, for the seismic that most people use, we're talking about, this is a pretty big structure if you think about it in terms of the bus, if you think about it in terms of outcrops that you can walk up to. But it's a tiny structure on your seismic. It's a tiny blip in your seismic. When you look at trap bounding faults, you're looking at things of really, really big scale. So yes, we can use what we can learn under the microscope, or at the outcrop, we can go to faults and look at them. But when we talk about trap bounding, geologically sealing faults, they're much bigger than this. And we have to appreciate that the processes, they can be upscaled, but they're not exactly the same. We have to have a mind for the scale of what we look at in seismic. So what are the main types of membrane seal? There are 2 main types of successful seal, a shale smear and a gouge. This is a fault here, and you can see the smear is intact and the gouge isn't. So I'll just take you through which each of those are. And I'll do it by using something from the Aachen University group. This is from Joyce Matz with Janis Urnai in Aachen. And they set up a sandbox. So these were all originally parallel layers of sand. The foot wall stays stable. You take these blocks out to allow the hanging wall to fall, and you look at what happens at the fault that forms. So I'm going to show you 2 videos from their website, and I have the little YouTube link down here as well. And what you can see is these are ductile shales, and when we move the fault, the shales stay intact because of the ductility of both the shales and the intermediate sands. They have to kind of both be a little bit ductile. But as you can see, the shales remain pretty intact for a good distance. It's pretty impressive. I'll let it run again, and you can see these black lines. They don't break. They stay very smeared and stable throughout. That's not always the case. This is a brittle sand, let's say, and that breaks pretty quickly. It doesn't work like the shales, but that's not to say that the breccia that's being formed here can't be a seal. I mean, if you think about things on a huge 100-meter plus size throw, then a lot of mixing and a lot of bits that get mixed into the fault zone, that can be a seal. So we can't just think about seals as smears, because they're not. And eventually, a smear will break down. It stays intact for a while, and then there's a hole in it. And we can see this from other sandbox experiments. This is an excavated sandbox. You look at the sandbox at the end. The clay, I kind of always like to think of the clay, it looks like white chocolate. And imagine you had a white chocolate layer, and then you faulted it, and you looked at where it's smeared all along the fault surface. And you can see that there's clumps of white chocolate kind of sticking to the fault scarp, and a lot of the rest of it has been smeared. But there's also holes. You can see the blue behind it. You can see the holes that are formed in my smear over a 3-dimensional object. So it's difficult to make smears with one bed effective. It does actually happen. There is the Braga field in the Norwegian North Sea, where they drilled through a 20-meter continuous fault smear. This is amazing. So the Drake formation, all the conditions were right when this faulted. The Drake is now down here, and it's smeared to the tune of like 20 meters thick through this fault zone. But again, this is not the rule. But the Statfjord, which was charged with oil, is present day juxtaposed against the Brent, and the Brent is obviously a great reservoir. But the Brent is full of water. None of this oil has got across. I mean, if it could, it would have, right? So this is an effective single smear, but it's completely not the rule. The rule is quite often that you have multiple sands, multiple shales, and that if you look in detail here, you can see sort of the staining And if I flip that image up, we can see that they're actually flat spots because, you know, the picture's kind of taken upside down. But if you imagine the flat spots of, let's say, hydrocarbon that are being sealed here, some of them, like this one, and I'd say definitely this one, this is a juxtaposition seal. The hydrocarbon here got up into the attic, filled up, and was held in place because there was nowhere for it to go. This is not a juxtaposition seal. This hydrocarbon here could have gone in here, but it didn't. Same with this one. This is sealed by the processes in that fault zone. And there are algorithms that allow you to describe multiple shales, the shale smear factor, clay smear potential, but they're not fully quantitative. They're more qualitative. They tell you at what point the whole system breaks down. And they don't describe all fault zones, because some fault zones are more brecciated, and the bigger they get, the more brecciated they become. They become wider, they become an entrainment of all the bits. So it was like that second video I showed you where everything started breaking up, but you could imagine all that mixing in the middle. And we call these a gouge because it's not a smear, but it's definitely potentially a seal because it's got all these pieces in it. There was no way of describing how much, what the gouge was or how much it could seal. And there was another problem, which is that we started realizing there was other seals, and we started realizing this, especially when we started producing from sand-rich reservoirs. There's another type, which is called cataclasites. So if you take a sand-rich fault and you fault it at depth, the quartz in that sand dissolves into the fault zone. And the fault zone itself is really crushed, and all the grains that are nice and separated and give you a lovely porosity in your reservoir all become crushed and brecciated and entrained. So here's a thin section from a cataclasite. The blue is pore space, let's say. It's an injection of a, let's say, hydrocarbon. And in the reservoir, which is either side of this, you've got nice porosity, permeability, interconnectivity, lovely. But in the fault zone itself, collapse of porosity, this has been completely brecciated. All of the pore space available has been filled in by the dissolution of quartz. Quartz is so hot that it starts melting into the fault zone. Here we have a fault zone that has no shale in it, but you better believe that's a seal. So it's not a smear, but it is a seal. You can get gouges that don't necessarily have a lot of shale in them, that's seals. So this is another problem. This is something that up until what I'm going to speak about next was described, we didn't have a solution for. So back in 1997, Graham Yielding, who was working at Baddeley's at the time, here he is in his Baddeley's t-shirt, that hasn't been doctored. So he became technical director at Baddeley's after this, but at the time he was working at our company and came up with something called the shale gouge ratio algorithm. So what he realized was you could take the volume of shale from a log of a sequence. So if you look at a V-shale curve, and this is V-shale, not all sands have zero shale in them. Sands have kaolinite, they have clay minerals, they will have some volume of shale in them. And not all shales are perfect 100% volume shales either. They can be dirty shales. So it's important that we subcategorize as fine as possible the shales and sands, and we can do that by using a V-shale curve. And what Graham then did was create the shale gouge ratio algorithm, which states that if you take the sand and shale sequence from a fault, then the gouge, the entrained material, the mess that's in that fault zone, has to come from that sequence. It hasn't come from anywhere else. So when you move the fault, all of the shales and all of the sands are getting smeared onto that fault zone. And that's what the shale gouge ratio algorithm does. It averages all the shale volume from all the sands and the shales into the fault zone based on how much throw there is. It's as simple as that. The shale gouge ratio algorithm tells you how much shale is in your gouge, or how likely a smear is likely to be, because a very small movement, you might have an intact shale. So the beauty of the shale gouge ratio algorithm is it describes all three types of seal. It describes cataclasites, smears, and gouges, and it does so at the scale of seismic faults, because that's what we're looking at. We're not, we're looking at big faults, not the kind of things that you quite often see at outcrop. But here's the thing, and this is a truth. If you want to know the truth about fault seal, it's that too many people think that SGR tells you whether the fault is leaking or sealing. Now, I understand that to a degree, because there's rules of thumb that you can use, and look, if the fault zone has more than 50% SGR, if it's more than half shale, the chances are that it's a good seal, right? But it's not enough. It's not where the story should end. You shouldn't just say my SGR of the fault is this, therefore I have a seal or a leak. Because remember, this fault zone has 0 shale. This would be an SGR 0 fault, but it's not a leak. It's preventing flow from one side to the other. So you can't just say SGR equals 0 equals fault, equals leak. That's not right. You need to convert SGR into a column height. And this is where things get a little bit more complicated, and this is where the mistakes are made in a lot of fault seal analyses, the conversion of SGR. So a lot of people can make SGR with their software, but converting it into a column height is where some of the mistakes get made. So let's go back to the idea of membrane seal, but let's use the gouge this time. And let's say that this is my reservoir, and I fill it with oil, and the oil is under pressure. The fault zone is water wet. There's water in the fault zone. But when the pressure gets high enough, the oil is going to try and start escaping. And it's going to try and find the best path through this fault zone. It might come up against a clast and need to go around it. But eventually, if the pressure is enough from this side, it will find its way through the smallest interconnected pore throat that it can and out the other side. So what we need to work out as geologists and fault seal analysis people is how much pressure is required before this can occur. Now, the idea of capillary threshold pressure, so the capillary entry pressure is the amount of pressure that's required to force this to happen. It's the amount of pressure that's required to change the shape of a droplet of oil or gas, change it so much that it can escape, because it will change its shape to get through here, but it has to do so under pressure, and the critical pressure at which it escapes is the capillary threshold entry pressure. We can show you this very clearly by use of an experiment, and to do that experiment we need two things. We need, well, three, but we'll start with two. We need a sieve like you'd use if you were sieving flour, to do baking, and we need a fishbowl. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn the sieve upside down to make a trap, and then we're going to put the sieve in the fishbowl. Now, the interesting thing about the sieve in the fishbowl is there's holes in the sieve. The mesh, has holes in it. So the only thing that's going to keep gas in the trap, and we're going to pump gas into the trap using this little air pump, the only thing that's going to keep that air there is the interfacial tension between the pore spaces. So if you think about our brecciated fault again, our fault in this case is the mesh. It's only one pore space wide, but the interfacial tension across that pore space is going to hold back pressure. And what I'll do is I'll just run the video, and I want you to kind of think, think about how big you think the column can be. How much gas do you think we can put into this trap? So the seal has reset itself, reasserted, bang, but then it leaks, through this point, and it leaks through this point because that's where the maximum amount of pressure has come from. It's come from the maximum, the tallest column that that pore space could possibly retain, given the buoyancy of gas, the exertion of pressure of the gas to escape. So that's a membrane seal. I know this is kind of, this seems more like top seal, and it is to a greater or lesser extent, but the same processes are happening in faults. So what I'll do is I'll come back to this, but it is very interesting. And what I'll do is I'll come back to it, everything that we've said so far, because the next step is converting what you know about the fault, the SGR, let's say, to a buoyancy pressure that can be withstood. So the pressure that you can build up, and then knowing something about how buoyant the gas or oil is, you can work out what height of column would be required to make that pressure, given all things considered. And it's not just enough to give the algorithm that, because remember, we have to tell it something about cataclasis, etc. So we also need to think about how deeply buried our reservoir is. And that's what these two algorithms do. So there's two ways of converting an SGR to a column height. They both go through the intermediate step of buoyancy pressure, and they're from two completely different techniques, but actually they come up with a very similar response. The yielding, same guy, Graham Yielding again, his way of doing it was to look at known columns from all over the world with shared aquifer pressures, look at the buoyancy that's being held in place across a fault, work out the SGR on that fault, and then say, of all of the faults that we've seen, these are the maximum pressures that these faults can withstand. And they're subdivided based on their burial depth. So yielding is, let's say, based on field data in terms of producing fields, wells that have been drilled in the subsurface. The alternative method is the Susan Spervic method from 2002. And what she did was she used core plugs, so a smaller scale kind of way of doing things, and she forced mercury through these fault zones, saw what pressure was required to force it, and then converted mercury air to hydrocarbon water. And also, funnily enough, they are all subdivided by burial depth, because burial depth is very important, like I said, to convert your SGR to a better column height. Two completely contrasting methods, and yet they come up with very, very similar answers a lot of the time. Not always, because there are certain special cases in both of these, but for the most part, these are the two things. And what I would say is a request, a plea from me to you is whenever you see a fault seal analysis, hopefully now that you've seen something of this, you might say in a meeting, if you saw somebody doing a fault seal analysis, that is SGR enough? Is knowing my SGR enough to know if it's a seal or not? But more than that, if somebody presents a column height, if they say, well, we think we have a 120 meter column, has the conversion been done properly? Because a lot of the time it isn't. A lot of the time the nuances of these algorithms aren't understood. They're put into software and you can press a button and you can get a column height, but you need to be able to parameterize that properly. If you don't put in the correct parameters, you will get a potentially bogus column height. Let me recap everything I've said so far, because I've been speaking for half an hour now and I've covered a lot of ground. And I just want to give a summary of everything that we've seen so far so that people can kind of really, remind themselves about what we've talked about. We've talked about juxtaposition seals. If you build a model and you find that your reservoir is juxtaposed against something that it can't get through, a shale or maybe a really tight carbonate or something, great, you've got a juxtaposition seal, you don't need to worry about fault seal, it's going to seal. But if your reservoir is juxtaposed against something that it might otherwise be able to escape into, another reservoir, a thief zone, or a carbonate, etc., well then you need to think about the membrane seal, and there's probably two main types, which are smears and gouges. But because we are dealing on such a huge scale, when we look at reservoir faults, at faults that seal over a geological timescale, we use SGR to average out, if you like, all of those uncertainties into something that we can scale to big scale, and use all of the sand and shale fractions that we have from the V-shale curve, which is really high fidelity data, to come up with an SGR, and then we convert that SGR into a column height. We do that by realizing that SGR is just a proxy for the size of the holes in the sieve. It's just a proxy. It tells us what kind of pore space we should expect in the fault zone. If we know how small the pore spaces are, then we might be able to figure out how much pressure that can withstand. But we can only do that if we know the buoyancy of the two phases that are creating that pressure. Is it oil and water? Is it gas and oil? Is it gas and water? These are all going to create different buoyancies and create different pressures. And then we need to also understand that we put something about the burial history of the fault in, because let's say we're dealing in an area where the fault was much deeper and now it's been exhumed. Well, it was much deeper, it was much hotter. Maybe quartz did dissolve into the fault. Maybe we need to take that into consideration. And we do that with uplift factors, but people kind of don't do this if they don't understand that burial depth is really important in converting an SGR into a pressure that then gives you a maximum column height. And it is a maximum. So whenever you see column heights reported from software, it is the most that you can possibly have in that trap, right? It is not an average. It is not an exact number by any means. The chances are it could be less than the maximum column height that you've calculated. But given that we've used thousands of data points from around the world, from every hydrocarbon province you can imagine, the chances that your fault is going to seal more than all the faults we've seen is kind of small. I'm not saying it's not possible, but the science would back us up in saying that when you have a certain SGR and you convert it to a column height, if you do it properly, the chances that you drill and get a bigger column are very, 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 very small. You shouldn't be drilling on the basis that you're going to, really go against all of the science here that's been 20 odd years in the making, okay? So that's kind of a synopsis of fault seal analysis theory in terms of how it works, but how do we do it practically? What do we do? How do we do a fault seal analysis? We can do juxtaposition analyses with triangle diagrams, and that's another talk in itself, but most of the time what we try to do in 3D, because a lot of the time we have this data, we have 3D data, even if it's made from 2D lines, we have the ability to build these models, and we should, because they're going to be a better way of doing it. And what we take is the seismic scale stratigraphy. So these are the events that you pick on the seismic. We take the V-shale log from a well. It can be from nearby, it can be from far away, it can be stochastic, it can be completely made up if you kind of think you know what the sand shale frequency is going to be in the reservoir. You then use the intersection of the event with the fault, and this is a fault surface. You use the intersection of the event with the fault to then hang the sand shale mix on the footwall and the hanging wall side of this fault. And we're just looking at the hanging wall side, we're looking at the side that's close to us, but it'll be hung separately off the hanging wall side. And then we have all that we need to do an SGR analysis. We have V-shale, we have throw, that's all you need. We can get an SGR at this point. And then we look at the fault kind of, if you look in the direction of this arrow, we look at the fault straight on, straight into it. And we can see that we have reservoir in the footwall. This is an Allen diagram, and you can see the fault plane is what we're looking at. It's as if you were looking directly at the fault scarp. And you have some reservoir that's going to be juxtaposition seal, but where our two colors overlap here, that's reservoir juxtaposition. And that's important because now we can get gas from the footwall side in through to the hanging wall side. In the software, we hang the V-shale off this. This gives us SGR. We convert the SGR into a column height, and the maximum column height that can be withstained by the weakest point highest up on the structure will determine our deepest possible column height. And that's a bit of a mouthful. I said a lot of things there, but let's break it down and think about it like this. Let's say our footwall is our reservoir. I can fill this footwall here because it's a juxtaposition seal. I can fill this. And maybe even that isn't the crest of the structure. Maybe I've got even more column to fill. But the second I come into contact with reservoir on the other side, I'm now relying on the membrane seal. I'm relying on maybe a smear or a gouge. And that has a sealing capacity that once it's breached, we lose the oil. And the sealing capacity for gas that we've worked out on this fault is about 75 meters from here, about 50 meters here, but that doesn't matter because this is the weakest point because it's highest up. So 75 meters from this point down is the maximum gas water contact that we can have. It's not the entire column. We've got all this column up here as well that's safe, that's juxtaposition sealed, but that's what we do in a quantitative fault seal analysis. This is the essence of a quantitative fault seal analysis. If that dotted line, that maximum column that you can seal is shallower than your requirement for an economic volume, then you're in trouble because your fault probably isn't a seal. But let's say for this to be an economic column, you only need to fill to half that, to maybe to, you know, something closer to where our juxtaposition is. Well, then you've got confidence to move forward because your fault notionally is, at least in theory, capable of holding a lot more than that. So that's the seal part about fault seal. But like I say, the fault is actually more important. And the reason for that is that it should be kind of self-evident that as much as hydrocarbon will try to escape through the fault, through forcing its way through the gouge, if there's a physical connection, if there's a real weak part of the fault by you know, some structural anomaly, it's going to go there first. It's going to go the easiest route. So the fault system, the trap, needs to be properly built. And the problem is that a lot of the time when we look at auto tracks, and this is an auto track here, auto tracks don't pick out where the faults are. If I just picked this using where the steps in the auto track were, I'd get it very wrong. There's a better impression, and I can blow up this part here and show you that the auto tracker came along to here, didn't go at the fault, it went early and then reasserted itself. But if I drew the fault back here, I'd be wrong. And similarly here, you get a perfect coincidence of the same wavelet on either side, and it's lovely. You know, like you'd almost think there was no fault there, but there is, because it's just a coincidence of the same reflectivity being thrown the exact right amount across the fault zone. And again, the auto trackers mess up there and would do a very bad job. And quite a lot of the time you see this, an auto tracker which should be just picking out this one fault picks out two faults, and if you pick that as two faults, you're at a loss straight away. Because think about it, if this is your reservoir, now you've got a half of the size of the fault that you should have to seal. So you can do your fault seal metrics on that fault, but you'll get a leaking fault. It should be that big. It should be the same size. It should be bang that big, and then you do your fault seal metrics on that and find a seal. But all of the work that you do is undone by a poor fault model. So let's look at this bigger fault down here, and I'll just show you something that you might use in future. The fault up here is shallow, or sorry, the event up here is shallow, and then the event down here is deeper. So what that looks, this section, this fault looks like on a map is this. You've got the greener shallow bit and the blue deep bit. And this, you then go from section to section to section, and you build up a picture of your map. And that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this. Now, this is called the heave. It's the distance that the event has been offset horizontally. It's not something we measure quite a lot. We're always interested in the throw, how much it's moved vertically. But the heave is important because when you grid this up in your software, that bit gets blanked out. The black bit in my section is the black bit in my map, right? So that is the heave of a fault. So when you see a fault map and you see these big, massive black heaves, you automatically think they're big faults, because that's what you'd need to separate the horizon a lot horizontally. You need a big fault, right? So it would stand to reason that if the heave is big, the fault is big. But look at the color. The color on this part of the horizon is pretty much the same color as this part of the horizon. And what that tells me is if the color is the same here or here, or the depth is the same at 2 points across the fault, there's no fault there. Like, this is where maps can be really misleading. Like, it looks like there's a big fault there. I'm positive now, I don't even need to look at the seismic to tell you that there is no fault there. How can you have a heave that big and separate the fault that much, but there's no distance, there's no vertical movement? We see bad maps all the time, and this is what I'm getting at. You know, you need to mind the gap, because the gaps are important. The gaps are what you're going to use to do all your fault seal metrics, all your SGR, all your column heights, everything hands off the throw. And if the fault is not correct, if the fault is the wrong throw, you're going to get the wrong answer. It doesn't matter what else you do. Auto trackers especially are guilty of all of this, and it's because they only follow signal. As I showed you a moment ago, they don't know anything about geology. They're unintelligent when it comes to geology, and they're just plain out stupid when it comes to faults. They just cannot pick faults out. They can't, not properly. That's where you come in. That's where the human element to this comes in, is that you need to be, you know, have your thinking cap on and pick the faults. So here's another truth about fault seal analysis, is that hydrocarbon escapes through physical weaknesses in the trap. And here's a physical weakness. Here's a relay zone. So this is from Arches National Park in Utah. This is a fault that's dying out towards the tip here. Here's another fault, and that's dying out towards here. And neither of these faults have been big enough to meet. So what's happened to the horizon, let's say, in between, is that it's still intact. The rock is intact. You can walk on the same event all the way up this relay and out the other side. And the reason that's important is when we're picking these features in seismic, a lot of people would pick the red fault here, but how many of you would pick the yellow fault? It's such a small feature that you might be tempted to not pick it, or that you might not see it, or if you're doing this very quickly and you're picking at you know, every 100th line, let's say, you're definitely not going to pick it. But if I bring in the horizon data now, and then I remove the horizon, the section, you can see that what I have is a perfect relay zone. That's what a relay zone looks like in seismic, but it's just so difficult to pick, because and if I make a surface out of that horizon data, you can see that all of the fault seal metrics in the world now don't matter, because if I've got a trap here and I've got oil in it, it's just going to walk straight up and out the other side, just like oil could here. Physical connections, relay zones, something called branch lines, which I'll get to in a minute. These are the most important thing to find in your trap, because that's where oil's going to go first. Forget about everything that I spoke about for the first half an hour. Forget about it if you've got these guys, because this is where oil is going to escape. So you need to have time to build a proper fault model. You need time to go back into your prospect and pick the faults at a much higher resolution than maybe you did before. Because it's fine to pick things coarsely when you're trying to identify, you know, where the main big barriers are. But if you're trying to figure out whether that trap can hold oil in it, it needs to be a higher fidelity model. It needs to be more precise. Otherwise, your analysis really won't be as confident. And we know this because we can look back through, I'm not going to go through these, but you know, it just happens time after time after time after time. We do dry hole analyses, and so often when we drill a dry hole, the problem is the trap. It's not necessarily the seal, it's the trap, it's the coherent structure. And you can make mistakes, and you can drill a well and you can get a slightly different result than what you thought. But we really shouldn't be making mistakes like drilling wells and then finding out after there was a relay ramp, because you can see these in the seismic. If this is a risk you can mitigate, you should be doing it. Like, there's no excuse for losing hydrocarbon out of a trap where you could have seen the physical connection that lost your hydrocarbon. If you do a membrane analysis, let's say an SGR to column height analysis, and you drill the well and you get a smaller column height, there's any number of reasons why maybe that didn't work. And you can be forgiven a lot of the time because there's a lot of uncertainties here. We're drilling 3 kilometers under the surface. Like it's a difficult thing that we're doing. But you really shouldn't be forgiven for not picking the physical connections, the physical escape points. You need to be able to identify those in your prospect. So how do you do that? And why is it not often done, and why is it difficult? Well, I often say this to people. I'll show you this architect's drawing of a house, a 3D rendering of a house. And straight away, all of you know that that's a good house. That's going to stand up. None of you are architects, I think. I could be wrong. Maybe you transitioned out of architecture. But the chances are you don't know how to do an architect's drawing. You don't know how to create this. But you know instinctively that it's good. And if I show you this, you know instinctively that's a really bad model. That's horrible. Don't build that house because it'll fall down. Here's the problem. If I show you 2 maps, one of these maps is good, one of these maps is bad, as good and bad as those 2 models are of the house, but you're not preconditioned to see that. You don't have the lifetime of experience of what a house looks like to be able to know whether a map looks good or not. Now, I showed you the little mind the gap thing a minute ago as a little trick, but there's loads more tricks that you can use, but you don't know them because they're not native to you, you haven't grown up with them. And it's difficult for you to see what a good map is and what a bad map is instinctively. And I'll say one more thing as well, is that when we look at a map, we're kind of only looking at the floor plan of one level of this house. It's just one level. And you can get a good floor plan in a bad model. You know, you can't obsess about the reservoir map because it exists in 3 dimensions with things above it and things below it. And all of that has to exist in 3 dimensions, like the house. It all has to stand up. It can't be a thing on its own. And I think that's a real problem in the industry, is that we obsess on the reservoir map. We don't pay enough attention to the 3-dimensional geometry of it, of what it represents. And therefore, sometimes we drill on bad maps. Yeah, maybe sometimes we hit oil, but then we have problems in production because there was faults there that we didn't know about. So it's just good practice to build better models. So how do you do this? Well, it's getting on for 8 o'clock and I've been probably for the last 50 minutes. This is the best practice. You pick the fault sticks. Here's a load of fault sticks from a project that was a PhD actually that we helped with in the North Sea. And you can all probably pick fault sticks, but it's the correlating those fault sticks into surfaces that people can have a problem with. You know, you need to see these things 3-dimensionally. You need to be able to think, you know, and in that way, using time slices are good because time slices give you another dimension. It's not just that you're picking the sticks and the sections, because it'd be very easy to correlate, let's say, all of the sticks that are in green now into one fault. And maybe that's even appropriate. We don't know until we look at the displacements on this. But what's probably more likely is actually that's the fault that I'm making now, and the other fault is another one behind it. And I need to join that fault to the other fault. When I create my fault surfaces, when I put my polygons in, yes, they're great because the raw data now is up against the fault and I can make these intersection polygons. But I also need to connect the faults. And I need to connect them where they meet, because that's very important. And I'll show you why branch lines are important by virtue of this demo, which is if I look at these 2 faults, you see the purple one and the yellow one, they don't quite meet because I haven't interpreted them to connect. But you can see from the horizon data, high here, low here, it's dislocated across this fault. And if I create polygons, so the intersections, it doesn't exactly work. So what I'm looking at are is the solid line, which represents the hanging wall here. And it doesn't exactly work at the fault. It doesn't pick out exactly where the break is. So what I need to do is physically connect this fault to this fault And I do that by virtue of a branch line. And there's the branch line that you see in green now, which is an object that goes the entire length of the fault in this case. And then when I update the fault surface, they connect. And that's important because now I have two watertight surfaces that when I create my polygons, now it jumps at the right place. Now there is proper dislocation where they join. That solid line is what I'm looking at. Many of you might be drawn to the dotted line in the background. That's what's representing what's happening in the footwall here, and I haven't made my branch lines there, so it's not a very good polygon. So in the hanging wall where I have made my polygon, I can now create a surface. It's at that point you should be creating a surface. The problem in the industry and with software, I guess, is that we tend to start with the surface. We start with the auto track. We start with a map, and then we look at the faults as a secondary object, but they need to be hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And the way we look at that is by looking at the intersection of those, the polygons that I was just showing you. And this, like, look, it does seem like a lot of hard work. It seems like a lot of intricate detail to be building this level of model. That's what you need. Like, if you're going to do a good fault seal analysis, that's the level of analysis you need to do. You need to be able to build this. And you need to be able to QC your model. You need to be able to say, how good is this? How can I quantitatively, quality control my model? And a lot of people, when they say, how do we quality control this? How do we assess this? And they'll say, we restore a section. I would say that in the 15 years I've been at Badley's, I know how to restore sections. I've never restored a section. I don't need to, because, I mean, what good is a restored section through here anyway? I mean, when you're dealing in a three-dimensional object, you need three-dimensionality. This 2D world kind of only has certain implications. Yes, when you're dealing in a complex thrust fault, let's say, and you're trying to work out where all of your elements are, okay, restoration's good there. But the problem with restoration is this is a fault section that restores perfectly. And it was given to 8 different teams of geologists to make maps out of. All of these lines on the grid are sections that balance perfectly, but when they tried to correlate these into a map by correlating one fault to another, all 8 teams got completely different maps. It's a three-dimensional problem. A lot of people can pick faults on a section. It's connecting that fault to the next fault. That's where the difficulty is, and that's where you need displacement analysis. This uses all the three-dimensionality of the fault to really give you some rich data about whether it's a good fault or not. These are things like length displacement cross plots. Is the length of the fault sensible for the amount of throw it has? Like, we've seen a lot of faults in outcrop there. There's no point in having a really big fault and then it's really short. Like, that wouldn't happen. It's physically not possible to break rock like that. So we know that rocks that have to uphold the laws of physics are not going to, have really big throws and then be really small. Can't happen. And if you plot a fault on that plot and it plots out here or out here, that means that it's too long or there's too much throw on it. And it's just a really quick QC. And you can do this with individual faults and with fault arrays. And what we do with fault arrays, we look at the profile of the throw along all of that polygon, and that helps us to identify things like relays. And here's the problem: you have to iterate. You then have to go back to the model and maybe do it again. You have to kind of, fix the polygons, make sure that everything's watertight. And it's that iteration process that allows you to build a house. And this model here is great because all of the polygons fit on top of each other. That's a really good way as well of QCing your model. Take your polygons from your shallowest level, take your polygons from your deepest level. And if they don't kind of make a surface that could move, then potentially you've got a problem somewhere in between. These are all the real quick QC steps that you can do to make sure that when you press the button and you create a map, it's at that point you should be creating the map. And this is it. When we auto track and we create the raw data, the software automatically grids it and it looks like a map. It looks for all the world like something that you should be drilling on, but you really shouldn't. Until you've QC'd the faults, you don't know whether that map is a valid surface or not. You saw what the auto tracker was doing at the faults. It was creating completely bogus geometries, and an automatic surface created from that would look like a faulted surface, but it's a really poor map. It's at this point that you need to do your fault seal analysis. It's with this level of model that you have a map that's worth investing time in. And I mean, it's right the way through the workflow. We can see it in production as well. Here's an example where we had a production model. There was no history match coming from it. It was actually Steve Jolly, a guy at Shell. He took it out of the host, this model out of the host program, put it into our program, and fixed all the faults in it. And when he put it back into the reservoir simulation model, they had a history match in no time, because good models are valuable to everyone. A good framework model has value right the way along the chain, from exploration through to production. And everyone should be using the best model that they can possibly get out of their seismic. And unless you're QCing your faults with displacement analysis, with that three-dimensionality, you're probably not making the most you can do out of it. Because when I spoke at the start of this, I was talking in an exploration sense about seals on a geological timescale, but they matter in production. Because, like I say, if a fault seals for 50 years, if it's a kind of an okay seal, well, your field's going to be abandoned at that stage. Like that's lost. That's lost volume in a compartment, unless you inject and force that, sweep it through. But there's another problem, because in an injection, you change the pressure in the reservoir. And remember what I said about moving faults? Like, you really don't want to reactivate your fault, because then you can lose volume up dip. Now, probably the best thing that can happen to you when you lose volume up dip is that you just lose the volume and it goes somewhere else. The worst thing that can happen is it can come out at the seafloor, you know? And this happens. You get people injecting, it reactivates a fault, the fault spills the hydrocarbon up to the seafloor, and then you have an environmental catastrophe. Like this is really important stuff. And we've dealt, like, it was a long time ago, but we dealt with a really important case in the North Sea where the platform itself that they were drilling for was unstable. Like, this is really dangerous stuff, you know? I mean, it's really important stuff to get right, because, you know, at that point, instability in faults that cause instability in a platform, then people's lives are at stake, and it's not just money. So all of this is really important. If you're going to inject, if you're changing the stress, if you're changing the pressure profiles of your reservoir, think about stress. Think about what it does to faults. Think about how your faults are not just geological barriers, but also baffles to flow. And I won't go on about this because I'm at the hour mark, but I'll just show you a very quick study, which is of transmissibility multipliers. So transmissibility multiplier is a way for you to put fault seal into your reservoir model, into your production model. So let's say you've done all the exploration correctly, and you've done your fault seal correctly, you've built a nice model, and you've hit oil. So far, great job. Now you need to produce that oil as best as possible. And one way that you can do that is you can figure out how faults are going to affect the flow as they go from, let's say, one side to the other, because you might be injecting here and producing here. Well, if that's the case, the oil has to be swept through all of these faults. So they're not strong faults. You can sweep the oil through them, but they will slow down the flow, and that's what we're measuring. We're measuring how much the fault is going to slow down flow through from one part of the reservoir to another. That's done by transmissibility multipliers. I won't go into it, it's a whole talk in itself, but we can create these properties through using essentially SGR, and also we need to know something about the permeability of these things to create transmissibility multipliers for faults. But what I'd say is, again, without a good cellular model and without a good reservoir model, you know, a lot of your work could be undone. When you look at history matches, a lot of reservoir engineers tend to take a very tortuous path to getting a history match, which is they switch faults off and on as they see the connectivity of the field described by the pressure variations within it. That's not a great way of doing it. you can do it that way, but it's like saying that all faults are either open or closed, and that's not true. Some of them are partially sealing and will slow down the flow but not completely stop it. So there's a way of doing better than just open or closed, and it's the transmissibility multiplier method. Here's an example from the Scott field. This was Statoil, Hydro, Equinor now. And this is the production data of water from the field from when it was brought on stream in mid-94. If you use a all faults closed method for this reservoir model, you will get a very poor history match. And the reason for that is not all the faults are closed. If you just take where a reservoir was juxtaposed against reservoir and you open that, but you leave all the others closed, then you get the green line here, which hopefully you can see. It's a better match, and it kind of matches the profile better, but it's still not great. And then if you use the modified open method, which is what most reservoir engineers will do, is you get a good fit, but that's because you're iterating the opening and closing using the data. So of course it's going to fit the data because you're using the data to temper getting the correct result. The problem with that, the problem that I always think is with this, is that if you are iterating your data to match what's happened in the past, how good is it of a predictor of what's going to happen in the future? When you try to predict what's going to happen in the next compartment, or if we inject here, how much are we going to sweep? It needs to be a predictive tool. It can't all be about iteratively changing things so that it matches what happened in the past. Like, I don't think that's a good predictive tool. If you use the transmissibility multiplier method or the SGR method on these faults, that's the pink line. And okay, in mid-96, maybe there's a little bit of a mismatch there, but for the most part, it's a great match, and it took less than a day. That took less than a day to do. The reservoir engineer took 3 months to get the same result. These are really important, really things you can do to massively speed up everything. And also you can do this before you even drill your first well. You can look at your model and think about the field development plan before you even drill an exploration well. You can think, okay, I'm going to drill an exploration well, but where is it best placed? Okay, I think this is my trap, but if I drill it here, am I already going to be potentially missing pay because there's a compartment here that I can't drive through on a production timescale? All of this thinking can be done before you drill a well, if you're given the time to do it. And I appreciate that's really the barrier. I think this probably, if I come back to the start again, and I'll finish the talk here, the great barriers to good fault seal analyses are that people don't focus enough time on the fault. Maybe they focus too much on the seal. People don't convert SGR to column height properly because maybe they're not expert enough to do it. You don't need to be an expert, you just need to know, you need to read those papers and understand what you're doing. That's another part where things fall down. But I would say that as much as you can agonize over how much a seal will hold, if you're not building a good, robust QC'd model using displacement analysis, then it's very, very, very difficult to have confidence in your meaning, because there's a lot of good science here. We're drawing on 25 years of data of, Badley's published the shale gouge ratio algorithm and the world is using it. If you use fault seal software, it doesn't matter what it is, anything, Petrel, Rockstar, you name it, if you're using fault seal software, it's using the Badley's algorithm, okay? And that is because we didn't patent it. We published it so that the world could use it. And we have collected a huge amount of data over the past 25 years. And we know what works and what doesn't. But there is none of that will save you if the model is bad. If your faults aren't built properly, don't connect properly, if you've got relays in there that you haven't identified, forget about all of the seal, forget about the first half an hour of this talk, because none of it matters. You need to build a good model, and you need to explain to your managers, you need to explain to your colleagues that every minute that you spend improving your model is not a minute wasted. It is such value to everyone in your company if you are given more time to build a better model. So the truth about fault seal analysis is it's far more about the fault than the seal. And if people only have 10 days to work on a fault seal project, spend 8 of it interpreting, spend 8 of it building that prospect properly, because you can do the seal part quite quickly, and if you know what you're doing, you can, you know the parameters, you'll get a result, but you need to have a good model. And that's basically, what I came here to say. I hope I have told you about a little bit about all of the different aspects. There's probably 10 more talks easily this length on many of the aspects that I've spoken about here, but I can't speak about everything. I can just give you an overview of the problems as I see it. I've done probably over 100 fault seal analyses. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, and the same mistakes keep getting made over and over. And I hope today that I explained to you what those mistakes are and where to spend your time and where the value is in doing this. So, like I say, Petropro, these are really nice people. Don't be afraid of them. By all means, reach out to them. Reach out to me. That's my email address as well. I'm more than happy to have an email from you or connect on LinkedIn or whatever. The more people that know about this, the better. It doesn't matter what. Look, you can use our software. It is. I would say it's the best in the industry to do this. Like that, we've been building it to do this for 25 years, right? So it is certainly the most focused. I would say that I work for the company, right? It doesn't matter. If
Halo Mas Ricky.
well,
Dave, I lose
that was
you.
well timed. My wife was cut out.
No problem.
But I think I was just at the end.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, Mas Ricky.
Oh, yeah, I'm seems like disconnected. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
listen, sorry about that. I think I
No,
just
no,
got cut off.
it's me. It's me. I'm disconnected. I'm also disconnected. Okay, thank you, Dev, for the nice presentations. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I think that is very insightful talk. Yeah. Do you want to move to the questions sessions, because there are some people raise a hand for questions here?
I'm more than happy to. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I will call the name. Yeah, the first one is from Win. Yeah, Pak Win, you can turn on your audio, please. Pak Win.
Hello?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Hi, David. Absolutely great talk. I've been in this industry for quite a few years, and everything you were cautioning, everything you were raising as points are spot on. Absolutely. It's funny. Over the years, I'll look at maps that have come from some of these auto pickers. And I have a geophysicist who absolutely stands by this map because that's what the auto picker picked. And I can only come back and say, well, it doesn't look geologic. What does that mean? Okay, so anyway, let me throw some questions at you, and I hope that they're not sliders. when you look at faults on seismic sections, they have different angles. They have different angles of attack, so to speak. The so-called normal growth fault will be very, very steep, shallow, and they tend to soul out. So the shapes of the fault considerations when you start looking at what could be or might not be sealing?
Yeah, so what I'd say there's a couple of things. Yes, growth faults are interesting. We can calculate things like expansion index and work out how much growth there is on that and how much true throw there is on it. And I guess it depends on what stage of the fault you're looking at. So if you're just looking at a present day, then the present day geometries are pretty easy to use. And we have a new tool that's just come out that handles specifically growth faults in juxtaposition diagrams, which hasn't been done before. I'd be happy for you to have a look at that. It's actually a plugin in Petrel, which is a juxtaposition diagram, but it works with growth. So when you, let's say, restore the fault, notionally, you have to remove the intervals that weren't there as you bring the fault back to when it started, initiated, and then grew, because each of these growth packages weren't there at initiation. They got bigger as it grew.
Yes, sir.
There's a separate science to this almost. And you're right about the angles of attack, but what I would say is that the longitudinal and more importantly, latitudinal strain that's seen along growth faults, it has to fall within the bounds of what's possible, right? And this is what I think you're getting at, is that it's possible to pick faults that don't make geological sense. How do you prevent that from happening? You apply, in our software, you can, it's not just displacement that you're calculating, it's longitudinal and vertical or latitudinal shear strain. And if there are busts in that, then something's happening in the fault that isn't physically possible. So agreed, it's a kind of a special case. There's lots of special cases in fault seal. I mean, you know, when I spoke today, I was talking about 80%ers, right? The kind of the common or garden fault seal issues. But there are some, you know, there's high pressure, high temperature. There's all, like, there's so many different parts at which it gets really hairy. But, you know, most of the time, and I was trying to speak to a kind of a broad church today, most of the time, the mistakes are made at the level that I was talking about.
Yes.
If you've got a complicated special case, by all means, at that point, seek an expert and get expert advice. But for most people who don't have that ability or budget, let's say they're working in a company where, you know, they're not going to get a consultant, then there's papers there. There's a lot of stuff in the literature. You can figure a lot of this stuff out yourself, but you need to have the basics, and the basics are hopefully what I shared today. So I'm not sure if that answered your question or I went off on a...
No, that was fine. Let me. I know there's some interest, and there's some other people that want to ask a similar question. So let me throw out another one, and I'd be happy to ask FOSI to have you come back for the Dave Quinn #2 presentation. Maybe,
oh God Almighty,
maybe 3 and maybe 4. But how do we approach, as explorationists, eventually we've got to go down the line and do a risk analysis. And what has often driven me crazy is that people will be doing risk analysis and make determinations relative to the migration path, and they use the fault throws, they use the fault gouges. And then in a different part of the risk analysis, they do this risking of the seals. And now all of a sudden the fault are no longer migration paths, they're sealing entities. So how do we start to approach if faults are in general part of this petroleum system that are either feeding our reservoirs or sealing them? Oh dear, did I lose David?
Oh, okay.
Really sorry, guys. I have no idea why the Wi-Fi is so.
Actually, same in Indonesia also. The internet.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Same.
I don't know what the excuse here is because you're having a rainstorm and it's a perfect day here. But anyway, sorry, Win. You said Dave Quinn too, at which point I recoiled.
Okay. Real quick. A minor irritation for me is when we do risk analysis, people will invoke faults as migration paths, and so they say, well, the migration path was there at a certain period of time when the oil was generated, and then they use the fault as a path. But later on in the analysis, they say, oh, wait a minute, this fault is a sealing fault.
Hey, that's convenient.
So how do we take a step back in the overall petroleum system and grapple with faults being either migration paths or seals?
That is an excellent question, and it's something that isn't really dealt with well enough in the industry. It's certainly not dealt with in most software. Now, in our software, you have the ability to backstrip displacement. So it's kind of like restoration, but it's happening three-dimensionally. And it also takes into account the intersection of connecting faults, which is really important. If you've got a late fault that connects with your reservoir, okay, well, look, it wasn't there when migration was happening. It's there now when we need to think about it, but it wasn't there earlier. Or if the fault was synchronous with the main fault, then it needs to be thought of in terms of when the main fault was losing displacement as we backstrip and we take it back through time to charge, then what was the connecting fault doing? Like, and the intersection between those, like I say, the real leak points are branch lines and relay zones. They're the two, main culprits. So you need to be able to model what happens at the branch line, what happens to the difference in displacement, let's say, of the reservoir at that time, and then work out the SGR at the time of migration and try to emotionally work out whether that could be a leak or a seal at the time of migration. And then you can fast forward to today, decompact it if you like, and then look at it as a present day seal. So we can do that, but it's not standard practice at all. I would completely agree with you when it's not something that's done very well in risking. It is absolutely a complete marriage of convenience when you see people use the same faults to charge and seal their reservoir. It's happening in places like the Niger Delta and stuff. You have faults that are notionally side seals, and also they are conduits from deeper reservoirs to fill shallower ones. But let's not talk about, like, you can always, the devil can cite scripture and everything. You can always come up with special cases where these things work. Barents Sea is another one. Barents Sea is another one where you need to, you've got potentially four, if not more, overprinting rifts there. And the movement of faults at each of those is important because the charge might be different at any time. But what people are looking at is the present day situation and working out whether those faults seal or not. But you need to take a step back. You need to step back in time. And I think that's possibly what you're speaking about there. It's not standard practice at all, I would agree.
Thank you very much. Great talk. We're waiting for the Dave Quinn 2, 3, and 4 sequences.
Yes,
I'm going to turn it over to FOSI. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pawil. Thank you. This question is from Rizwan. The question is, in the cataclastic system, can a small fault throw become a good sealing of fault buffling, especially in high net to gross system? Any paper about this? That's the question.
Excellent question. Again, absolutely. I've heard, you can go into the field and you can see deformation bands, and you can understand that cataclastic faults in, I heard it once described, I can't remember the name of the paper now, it was described as a sheet of glass in the reservoir. You can think about that, that's what it looks like. It looks like a sheet of glass. You can go and look at these. There's no way you're moving hydrocarbon from one side of that to the other. It would take extraordinary pressure. And that way, small faults can actually be effective seals. Now, much the same as, if you remember, I showed you the smear, and remember I said it looked like white chocolate on the front of the scarp, and it was kind of, it was clumps of white chocolate, and then you could kind of see the blue in the background where it was starting to not, the smears weren't intact, it was starting to break through. Cataclastics go like that, right? They're not completely intact. You can't have a sheet of glass that's a couple of 100 meters wide and high, because they start to break down and holes appear. So at bigger scales, it's more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. But it's really important at smaller scales. And in the same way that small faults can be really good seals, if the frequency of the shale sand repetitiveness, if the wavelength, if you like, of shale sand shale is the same as the throw of the fault, then what you're doing is, here's my sand, I've got shale on either side of it. If I throw the reservoir exactly the amount of the reservoir, then I've got a juxtaposition seal. Mm. It's a small fault, but it's a perfect seal because it's in the shale that is forming my cap rock to the other side. So you can't just say small faults aren't important. They're really important, and they're more important on a production time scale. They're more important when you're doing your production, your field development plan. You need to work these in. Small faults don't create massive commercial volume traps. They just don't. But within those traps, they are extremely important. I can see actually one of the guys sitting in on this is John Walsh. He's from the fault analysis group, and their guys, Tom Manzocchi and John and Conrad, they've done a lifetime's work on this as well. And one of the early Manzocchi papers was just amazing. What he did was he introduced the effect of faults into a otherwise, on-off system history match, let's say, of a reservoir. The effect was massive. The effect is huge. Small faults can have a really, really important impact. And you know this when you're working on a reservoir and you're just not getting the drawdown that you think, and you just go, well, what's happening? And it's like, oh, this must be a compartmentalized part of the volume here. But you can't even really see anything. I mean, you have to really go and look for the faults because they're so small, but they are really effective seals. And I would say that of smears in places where the shales are numerous and frequent, and going back to the question, cataclasites, where you get these sheets of glass over reasonably, not huge areas, but maybe big enough to make a difference.
Okay, Dave, thank you. That's very interesting. Okay, most of your models, in FOSI analysis is showing a model in normal fault system. Yeah. The question is from Ruli Mardani: how to calculate the SGR in the strike slip regime? That's the question.
Yeah, an excellent question. It's difficult, is the first thing. There has not been a lot of research done on this. I'll say there's not been a lot of research published on it. Strike slip faults and even thrust faults, we know from speaking to people, from anecdotally, from working with companies, from doing projects ourselves and all the rest of it, we know that actually reverse faults have a very similar kind of capacity. You can use SGR pretty well on those. But strike slip faults, pure strike slip faults, there's almost nothing in the literature about these as seals. Like, as in, there's nothing that has been done to quantify why they are seals. Certainly, if you imagine all of the processes that I was speaking about earlier, smearing, because like strike slip is usually not pure strike slip. There's usually an oblique element to it anyway, right? So you can imagine there's some smearing going on. But all of the processes of grain dissolution, of grain breakdown, of brecciation, they're happening, and they're happening along quite a significant different distance of the fault. So it would stand to reason that the fault zone porosity would be collapsed, just like in our thin section picture earlier where I showed the cataclasis, where you had all the blue pore space in the reservoir, but in the actual middle bit where the cataclasite was, there was no pore space at all. What I would say, overarching to all of this, so it's not a good answer because it's very difficult to do, and I'd actually, I think it's best to deal with this on a case-by-case basis and to look specifically at that strike slip fault that you're looking at, and I'd be happy to have a chat with you about that. But what I'd say really what I preface this with is, yes, there are parts of the world, and you're in one, where there are strike-slip tectonics, where there are strike-slip faults. But globally, strike-slip faults are interpreted far more often than they occur, okay? What I'm saying is sometimes things look like a strike-slip fault and they're interpreted as a strike-slip fault. They're not a strike-slip fault. It's not actually dextral or sinistral movement that we're talking about. And the you know, yes, in parts of the world it happens, but we see certain geometries that are actually formed by normal movement, but that are easily kind of understood as strike-slip. My horizon so that now it's not horizontal anymore, and I throw that normally. What happens is the beds here, you know, it's not just a normal throw across here, you get a parent throw, so it looks like strike slip, but there's no strike slip has occurred. Yes, this bed is now over here, but it's actually just because it's faulted down normally. So often we see a parent throw that's actually, you know, just the dip of the beds rather than a pure strike slip movement. Because you have to think about the amount of energy that's required to create a strike-slip fault. You have to think about the amount of space that must be accommodated at the other end, right? So what often happens is it gets transferred, but if you're going to take a block of rock here and a block of rock here, you're going to move them that way. What happens here? Like, where are you getting all of that space from? And what happens on the other side? It's strike-slip tectonics are a difficult thing to unravel. And quite an awful lot of the time, the interpretation of a strike-slip fault isn't completely justified. So what I would say is, it's a good question. It's not in the publication record anywhere. There's no quantification of this. You can do your best with just looking at the throw of the fault and how much cataclasis might have happened in that. But you know, you're up against a difficult task if you're looking at strike-slip faults as prospect bounding faults, sealing over a geological timescale. It absolutely happens. There are examples out there, but we just don't have the depth of data to be able to quantify that. I appreciate it, not a great answer, but we just don't have it.
Yeah, still on the research here. Okay. We have a next question from Edo. Many thanks for the awesome talk, Dev. My question is, what if we have a fault that is surrounded by limestone or any lithologies that has no clay content? Does it mean we cannot use the yielding equations that you mentioned, or does the clay in equations mean the clay size grain? What's your opinion about that?
Okay, so you know, this is literally a who's who of the problems in fault seal analysis. These are good questions. You know, it really means people were paying attention. I like it. So look, yes, it's problematic because carbonates have extremely little, if any, shale volume in them. So if you have a carbonate sequence where there are shales, then you're going to get smears and you're going to get brecciation and all the rest of it. But so you could use the SGR equation if you like, but in your or the yielding equation, but in your analysis, what you have to do is get a V-shale curve and just drop all, like if that V-shale curve is done properly, all the carbonates are going to be near zero. What you'll then find is that your faults aren't very good seals. Now, there's two things here. We have almost no evidence of big prospect bounding faults being geological seals when it's all just carbonates. If it's just a carbonate fault, it tends not to be a successful trap bounding fault. But they really do have an effect on flow in the reservoir. So for that reason, about 5 years ago, we set up something called the Carbonate Fault Rock Research Project. This was a joint effort. It was set up by Badley's, but a lot of the work was done by Leeds University because they had the lab equipment, and they took on a couple of PhDs as well to go out in the field. And And we had people go from Bagleys as well into many different field areas across Europe and the Middle East, looking at carbonate fault zones, trying to work out, could we come up with an SGR equivalent for something that doesn't have S in it? Because without shale, the shale gouge ratio is very difficult to use. So, if not impossible. So what we did was we analyzed faults from a lot of different places and came up with another algorithm, which it's been kind of published. A lot of this, the field data has all been published, and I would encourage you to get in touch with me if you're working in an area with carbonate reservoir, carbonate faults. I can send you a couple of really good papers from that group that describe what type of fault zone you should expect given the FOSIs you're dealing with, or at least the carbonate type you're dealing with. Because that's another thing, you know, we say, see, siliciclastics are easy because there's sands and there's shales and there's like varying amounts of shale in them. You say carbonate, but you're talking about hundreds of different types of rock, you know, it's like, it's a completely different ballgame. So we looked at mechanical stratigraphy, we looked at micro porosity of different types of carbonates, and we looked at the collapse in permeability that you should expect in a given sequence, given the size of the fault that you have. So it's not quite as well developed as the SGR algorithm, but bear in mind that that's 25 years old plus, and this is in its infancy. I mean, it's something that is nowhere else in the research record. You'll see nothing about fault seals in carbonates anywhere in the research. There's bits and pieces of field work done, but nothing done to quantitatively take one to the other. Within companies, there has been work done. So John Solom has worked a long time at Shale at doing their own internal carbonate fault research group, and he's got some really, really cool work there. But that's not publicly available. You've got to be in Shale to get it, right? So what we're trying to do is create something that's publicly available, but it's going to take some time because, you know, we're at the infancy of it. We've just done the first phase of the carbonate fault rock group. We're about to start the second, and we're hoping to, you know, we've got a lot of companies on board sponsoring this, and we're hoping to get their data from their production models and look if our algorithm can be as successful as something like transmissibility multipliers or SGR. Like, I mean, that would be amazing to think that, because those things are pretty successful. So come back to the question, we have done things on it. I can show you, if you want to get in touch with me, I will send you the papers that we have to this point. It's not as well developed. We hope it will be in the future. Carbonate faults do not tend to make great side seals on exploration, you know, commercial volume traps, but absolutely affect flow in carbonate reservoirs. And that's what we're trying to figure out. How much do they affect flow?
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Very nice. This is the last questions, from Indi Amrullah. He is from Pertamina. Thank you, Mr. Dev, for the good sharing and explanations. My question is, number one, is there any cutoff of SGR value to define the fault is sealing or leaking? And the second one, is there any possibility for hydrocarbon to migrate along the fault zone, as we know that the lithology product in fault zone is cataclastic? That's the questions from Indi Amrullah. Well,
yeah. Okay, so Graham Yielding again in 2002, I think, did a study where he looked at all of the producing North Sea fields, Brent Province fields that he could get his hands on the data for, and found that if you want to take an SGR cutoff in that part of the world, then you'd be looking at, he said 20, but I think I'd be more comfortable with like 25, 30% SGR plus. And Conrad Shiles of the Fault Analysis Group did something similar in the field, looking at outcrop scale connectivity and what would constitute a seal or not. And again, he found about 20% SGR plus is usually a good seal. But what I was saying earlier is you asked the question, is there a cutoff? That's what works in that part of the world. And that's what works for those reservoirs at that depth. It can't be transferred blindly to another part of the world. Okay? If you want to think about a cutoff, let's say 50%, right? Let's call a number. Over 50% SGR and over half of that fault zone is shale. So the propensity to have very intact smears, to have a very, impermeable fault zone is quite high. So if you wanted to just take a rule of thumb, I'd be, no matter where you are in the world, if you have over 50% SGR, then the chances are that's going to be a seal. I was trying to say in the talk is that you can't just take an SGR number and say it's a seal or a leak, because low SGR faults, like 0.5% SGR, can be seals.
Yeah.
High SGR faults, let's say 30% SGR, could be a leak. It could be a leak in the context of your trap, because if you need to seal 100 meters of column for that trap to be economic, you're in an overpressured aquifer, so the aquifer is already under pressure, and then you fill that with hydrocarbon with really buoyant gas. Let's say it's light gas, it's 200 grams per kilometer cubed, right? It's like unbelievably buoyant. The contrast between that, it's like imagine pushing a beach ball down into a swimming pool. It doesn't want to go, it's forcing back. That's the buoyancy pressure that's happening. And the more light the gas phase, the more buoyancy it's going to have. So that's going to create a huge amount of pressure against your 30% SGR fault. And maybe that pressure is too much to sustain a 100-meter column. Maybe that pressure will, remember the sieve, maybe it'll leak at about, maximum 50 meters is all you're going to get out of that fault. It's a 30% SGR fault, but it can't sustain the kind of column that you need to make that trap work. And that's what we mean by saying SGR alone is not enough. You need to convert it. You need to take it in the context of burial depth of your area, of the tectonic history of your area, of the density of your hydrocarbon phase. Only then can you take that SGR and say, we have a seal that can potentially fill our trap to an economic level or more. That's the point at which you have a fault seal analysis. Up until that point, if you just say, well, I've got a 30% SGR fault, it should seal, you haven't done enough. You haven't gone the whole, you have to bring that into the rest of the project. And you can hopefully, do that by reading just a few papers. It doesn't take a huge amount, but we can get better than just, I have an SGR X fault, it might seal or leak. Using cutoffs is only okay if you are extremely familiar with what cutoffs work in that part of the world. And, that Brent province is different from where you're working and from every other place as well. So, we work on these things globally, and we know what works. And I think, the best advice is to go the extra mile and do the conversion. And then the other question was, sorry, you'll have to repeat the question for me after the cutoff.
Yeah. The question is there any possibility for hydrocarbon to migrate along the fault zone, as we know that the lithology product in fault zone is cataclastic?
That was it. Sorry, apologies for that. I got tangled up in my own head there. Yeah, look, faults as migration pathways. It's a difficult one. Wynn brought this up earlier, and it's a double-edged sword, because you can use a fault as a conduit to get oil into a reservoir, but then you have to be careful. Are you using that same fault as a seal? When was charge? Like is the fault as you see it present day the fault that you are using as a conduit at the time of charge? So you have to wind the clock back. You have to, if charge isn't present day, a lot of places in the world it's present day. Can you get faults that are both seals and migration pathways? Yes. I would say it's probably less likely than what the obvious is, which is if it's, I think one of the best ways that you can think about this, and you look at the offshore Trinidad stuff, is a good way of having a migration up a fault and then into a reservoir is a smear because of the asymmetry of the smear. So let's say my fault does this and I form my smear here, okay? And I can get hydrocarbon up this side of the smear, and then the smear is intact. It's kind of almost made a little hood. And that way you can fill this, this reservoir with stuff that's come up the fault while it's moving and trap it there. But smears break down. You know, you can't do this endlessly. You can't get infinite volumes with it. It's a mechanism. There are several that work, but it is a dangerous game to play. I mean, there are some people that don't even believe that you can get migration up a fault zone, but to those people, I would say we have 4D data from fluid moving up fault planes. We can watch it, you know. And there's a paper in First Break. I can send that to you, and it's called a fault caught in the act of burping. What's phenomenal about that is that the fluid moves all along the fault plane, kilometer plus, like that. Geologically speaking, it's overnight. Like, well, geologically speaking, it's a flick of a finger. Like, it took probably a few months. But if you're looking at things in the context of the field, from charge, which might have been, you know, in the past couple of million years, something that takes a couple of months is instantaneous. So fluid flow up dip along faults, it's happening when the fault is stressed. It's happening when the fault is dilated. The fault is under that movement just before it breaks. When it's at that critically stressed fault, it's dilated, it's pumping the fluid. The fluid wants to get away, so it's going to happily use it. It's a really quick process. It can empty massive amounts of volume very, very quickly. And then the seismic event happens and it's quiescent again, and maybe it seals for a little while. But it works in some parts of the world, but it's a very dangerous game to play switch it on, switch it off kind of migration petroleum methods. I think it's not something that's well done in the industry. It's not something that's well understood. A lot of the software doesn't really properly model it, I don't think. So yeah, I think it's absolutely possible. It happens. We can see it happening. That's how sure we are that hydrocarbon can migrate up a fault. How sure are we that it can then use that conduit to fill a reservoir that is sealed by the same fault? That's trickier. It works in certain parts of the world, but you can't just apply it anywhere.
Okay, thank you very much, Dev. That's very fantastic presentations and discussion. Actually, this is a very difficult topic, yeah, but you can deliver it in a very simple way. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much, and thank you very much also for all participants that are still here. Yeah, thank you very much, and please be noted that we will also put this recording at our YouTube FOSI channel. Yeah, so stay tuned. Yeah, I will let you know. I think that is for me. So thank you very much. So we will be very happy if we have a next sessions for you. Yeah, just let me know. Yeah.
Listen, from my part, guys, thanks very much. And I'm basically baffled that this many people are still here at this time of the evening. So thanks everyone for your attention. That's very much appreciated. And thanks to Melinda and the guys at FOSI for the opportunity to speak to everyone tonight.
Yeah, I think that's for me. Melinda, do you have something to add?
No, maybe, yeah. Thanks again, Dave, for your time. Still lunchtime in UK. Maybe you can enjoy your lunch after this. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and for the insights. We are met in LinkedIn and you want to share this. So we are very happy to know about the fault seal. Maybe we can meet you. Maybe whenever you come to Jakarta, we can meet up together with all the. Yeah, just let us know.
Forward to the time we can travel again and get out to see people. It's
yeah, sure, hopefully soon after this pandemic. All right, that was a great presentation. For me, that's all. Thank you very much. And later on, if we're ready with the video, I will share with you as well. And maybe later on, if you don't mind, you will share the material to me and I will share to the participants as well.
Okay, then.
Thank Thank you very much, Dave.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you.